My wife, she wouldn't let me in the house. And I'm living in a tool shed out in front of our house. So every morning for the next 3 days, my kids are getting up for school. And I'm inside that shed. I didn't care. All I wanted was to inflict as much of the pain I was feeling onto her. My addiction started, I was probably 12 years old. It started for me with nicotine. I dipped snuff regularly from the time I was 12 years old on until I came to no longer bound this time. That began a life of hiding and a life of addiction for me. When I went to college, my whole identity was wrapped up in sports, in basketball especially. So when I got to school in San Diego, I didn't really know who I was. I was lost. I was scared. And that's kind of what really led me into drinking. Ended up, I lost my scholarship. And I'll never forget that feeling when Coach called me in the office and he said, "Hey, we're going to cut your scholarship from 100% to 75%. And I was like, well, I can't afford to stay. I could never forget that feeling. I didn't even call my dad and tell him. So I went home on summer break, still hadn't told my dad that I wasn't going back to San Diego. So I started delivering pizzas. I went from playing college basketball to delivering pizzas. So you can imagine the identity crisis. Started experimenting in LSD and smoking pot, and that became my life. I didn't care about school anymore. I didn't care about basketball. I literally had this huge void inside of me that basketball had always filled and made me who I was, and it went from that to drugs, like that fast. That went on for a while when my dad finally caught me, and my brother had a brain tumor, my youngest brother, and they were going through a lot, and he had caught me with marijuana and some LSD, and he kicked me out of the house. I decided I was going to move to Hilton Head, South Carolina. I had a friend that lived down there, and I was going to get a job in construction, framing houses. I thought moving would solve it, but it didn't. I just found cocaine and some other drugs. So my life got bad. I ended up getting arrested for the first time in Hilton Head. And at that point, I realized I had a problem. So I came home. So I got back involved in church. I sobered up. Never quit the nicotine though, but I sobered up, and that's how I met Melissa, was in church. And I'll never forget, when I had JD, I was high. I remember going to buy pills, right before he was born. I had my dope dealer pull out in front of St. Mary's Hospital in Huntington, West Virginia. I went down, left Melissa in labor, and bought pills. Wasn't long after that, Melissa found out, and I went to my first rehab in Florida. I broke a lot of rules. I was dipping snuff. Got caught and wasn't willing to be honest, and so I left. I attempted to jump off a bridge onto the 400. I ended up getting arrested. So they sent me to Rome, Georgia, to the Northwest State Mental Institution, and after 2 days there, I had insurance. They sent me down to Peachford Hospital. So I was gone from home, from my kids, from my wife for 16 months total. And as soon as I got home, I relapsed. This is how bad it had gotten for me. I bought my boys a new Xbox and was so excited to get it for them, but I had run out of money and was out of dope, and I was sick. And I was like, I gotta figure something out. Well, I remember that Melissa had went to Dayton with the kids. We were legally separated. She had just legally separated from me. So I wasn't living at home, and I knew they weren't home. And so I went over and I broke into the house and I took their Xbox and pawned it. It was one of the lowest points of my life. And 3 days later, Melissa calls. Your kids are scared to death. They don't want you around. When I came here, I had hopes that our marriage would be saved. One of the things that No Longer Bound talks about is we rescue, regenerate, and reconcile. And I got the chance to seek forgiveness from her. that form of reconciliation, me understanding that God may not want my marriage put back together, and there may be something else, for me, maybe something better for her. And I need to be open and willing to accept that. I want to be a vessel for God. Like, I want to be used. I want my life to be full of His purpose, not mine. I want to know that this was not in vain, that I didn't lose my wife and my relationship with my kids. God has a purpose for that. I believe had I accepted the fact that I had put myself here, I probably would have never lost my marriage. But had I never lost my marriage, I don't think I would have ever really truly experienced His grace and His mercy and His love. And it was just huge for me. And the big thing, like the internship, was one of the happiest times of my life. And man, I love my kids. I love them with everything in me. I want to be a dad more than anything else. But staying here and learning what God has for me has been probably one of the greatest things that ever happened in my life. I am Jonathan, and I am no longer bound.